I think that the people who are arguing that he's been given a ton of fuel, like they just poured rocket fuel in his engine, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, if you just look at the fundraising he's done off the back of this already.
Right, but what did they...
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I don't mean in terms of politically. I mean, like, legally. Like, what did they find?
Oh.
And is he actually in trouble? Because I think the goal was to try to knock him out of the 2024 elections, right?
Bunch of Big Mac
trying
receipts.
him for crimes. What did he do?
I don't know.
Do you know what he did, Jamie? Has it been absolutely released what they caught?
I don't know that yet, but holding on to boxes of documents
is it really about
he wasn't
like
supposed to have.
confidential information that he shouldn't have had in his home, like that was so important they couldn't just ask for it? They had to go in there and get it.
Well, I think the problem is having it, right? Because if you have it in an unsecure location, meaning unsecure in terms of the government's protection, it's not locked up in archives. It's not in a place that's very difficult to access. You have control personally over the access to something that's top secret. If that's the case, then that's a problem because that safe could be open. People can get in there. People can get the code. They can copy it. They can send it to China.
Yeah, but do you think that's a genuine concern, or is it they want to find something, anything that they can use to prevent him from running again?
That was Joe Rogan reacting to the Mar-a-Lago raid, making some interesting points there. I think I don't totally agree. So obviously it's, in some very narrow sense, it can be good for Trump to have, I mean, it's never good for you if the FBI raids your home, but does it put the focus back on Trump? Yes. I don't know how long that's going to last.
Fundraising, he made that point about fundraising.
Yeah, the fundraising point is interesting. It certainly energizes the very pro-Trump faction into being even more pro-Trump. So it could serve, to the extent that Trump's only interests are staying in the spotlight for as long as possible, yes, it serves Trump's interests. I would argue, and have argued all show, that keeping Trump in the spotlight is not good for the Republican Party as a whole. We're already seeing it in the changing fortunes of what November is now expected to look like. The predictions are now that we're not going to have necessarily this massive red wave that we were expecting. And also, I don't quite agree that it's part of like a concerted strategy on Democrats' part to like prevent him from being able to run. Like,
you don't?
No, that's not going to happen.
Wait, not a concerted strategy. I shouldn't say that.
Well, that's not going to happen.
But here's the problem.
If he's going to run, he's going to run. He can run from prison, but he's going to run.
The question. The question is whether or not they can damage them. So one, people are making these arguments about whether or not if he makes the statutory violation, he'll be barred from running. But even that, and the legal quagmire of that aside, the argument is that this hurts him enough politically that it makes it more difficult for him to run. And it's difficult, like, I'm not saying that this was like some deep plot that Democrats coordinated on. There's no knowledge, there's no way for us to know that. But when you have the media salivating in the way that they've done from the jump without knowing anything at all still about the content of what was actually discovered, and talking in terms of can he run again, is he going to go to jail, lock him up. I mean, again, obviously Republicans did the same thing about Hillary Clinton. I'm not saying that Democrats are outliers here in the way they've behaved, but when you see how they've approached this, when you see senior Democratic officials kind of thirsting for Trump to be felled, as it were, politically because of this event, it's very hard for me not to understand why people would read into that as the cause of why this investigation has been pursued in the first place.
I would say they're clearly not trying to stop him from running because they want him to run. They absolutely want him to run. There's no indication to me they've learned their lesson. We've talked on the show about the DNC, running essentially ads for the more Trumpy candidates, the more MAGA candidates. They did that in that one Michigan race and other places because they want the Trumpy people front and center because they know that's what's dragging the Republicans down.
I mean, aren't we making the same argument? They want someone to run who they think is damaged, and that this is, obviously this might poke the bear and get Trump even more interested.
I'm just saying they're not trying to prevent him from. It's not possible to prevent him from running, and they're not trying to prevent him from running. They want him to run.
But I'm saying different things here. There are people who definitely want Trump to go to jail over this, and many of them speak on MSNBC all the time.
Right.
So when people are asking, is this really about Democrats wanting X, Y, and Z? Is this really about? There's a lot of different camps of Democrats going on here.
Sure.
So even though Hillary Clinton, we know in 2016 wanted Trump to run, I wouldn't say as a whole necessarily Democrats wanted Trump to run. Many Democrats in very good faith thought that Trump was toxic and horrible.
Democratic voters want don't want Trump to be president
Right.
again, but
Right.
Democratic pundits know that he's very, very good for business, that he's their only business strategy left. And many Democratic politicians know, right, ultimately the goal is to not have Trump or Trump policies or the Republicans. It's just a battle with the Republicans. It's not a battle with
I
Trump.
guess I disagree there, and I would keep taking these
Look, I'm
point
sure
by
there are
point,
honest
category by
Democrats who,
character.
I'm sure I'm not.
No,
I'm
but you talk
characterizing
about
the wrong.
pundits. Let's talk about Democratic Party pundits. When I watch MSNBC, the Democratic Party pundits want Donald Trump to go to jail over this, or they want him to be legally barred from running for president over this. That is the tenor of the conversation. Every question is, well,
they don't
is it
actually.
possible? Well, is it possible that Donald Trump might go to jail over this? Well, who's to say? Is it possible that he'd be legally barred for even running for president? Those are the kind of hypotheticals that are being asked on and on.
And if they actually went to jail, they wouldn't be able to talk about that anyway. It's Joker and Batman. It's kill you. What would I do without you? That's what it is.
Right, we're talking past each other. Joe Rogan is putting out there what are people being inspired by? What is really motivating the thirst and covering the story?
A desire to jail Donald Trump. Okay, I agree with you on that.
So and that is why I think that there's this weird credibility issue here, that even if there is something legitimate here that that Trump took intentionally, took nefariously, and that had a really significant national security impact. I do think that the way people have been covering this, and it didn't have to be that way, the way that people have been covering this has fed in to the most conspiratorial understanding of why the FBI did this raid, which is, from a conservative perspective, that people are out to get Trump. And we saw this in some of the clips I played during my radar yesterday. There was these interviews done of people who have gone to Mar-a-Lago to protest, and to a T, they've all said, this is a political witch hunt. They're doing this just to keep Trump out of office. So whatever Democrats believe, or whatever conspiracy did or did not happen, that's very much the messaging that's coming down the pike on Republicans' fears. And I think that liberal coverage is feeding into those fears.
Okay, I do agree with that. But the reality is, I don't think the reality is any of that. I think the reality is Trump took some boxes because he doesn't have an especially high regard for following like the details of the law, or maybe it was confusing, or maybe anyone could have gotten
He's a spacey
mixed up in
Gemini
this.
king.
And I don't know what that means. And then the FBI did what the law enforcement deep state does, what deep state's going to do, which is annoy people and go after them to the maximum extent allowed under the law, which is a lot. And they like to make life difficult for a lot of people, including Trump and Trump-like people who've been very critical of them. It's the agency acting in its best interest, doing what it does, which maybe in some sense looks like a Team Blue political goal, but is not I don't think is in concert with other
here's
Team
the
Blue
devil's-
entities. That's not to say it's good or it's right. It's just very typical behavior from the FBI.
So here's the devil's advocate question, which I wish people would ask of, conservatives in these mainstream news environments where you have people who are very much defending Trump and being critical of the raid as a matter of political principle. What should the approach have been, given that there had been this 18 months or so of requests of these documents? Even if we agree that it's nothing but cooking recipes, they're documents that, according to the law, should have been turned over. What should have been the next step after you ask, after some documents are given over, after there's evidence from the documents that have been returned that there is in fact confidential information, even though there had been disclosures that there wasn't confidential information, when there is this mixed record of compliance? At what point, given that there is the potential for potentially confidential national security secret style information in these boxes in a public hotel where people are coming and going, at what point, if any, would you have considered this FBI raid appropriate? And but for an FBI raid, what were the alternatives? Because if you can answer that question and tell me that there was something else that should have been done, then I think that you have a very strong argument that this was a witch hunt. But if you cannot answer that question, and if you can't give me a timeline that you think is appropriate to let confidential, potentially sensitive information be sitting in basically a hotel basement, unlocked for all of that time, or not secured officially in all of that time, then at some point you have to concede that the government is at its limits, and some kind of physical intervention into Trump's space was necessary to follow the law.
Well, but I think it does matter what the documents actually say. If it is just cooking recipes, probably nothing needs to be done because it's stupid and the law is overly strict in this way. Or if it's state secrets that he could sell or something, then yes, of course. Then there are circumstances in which a raid is justified.
But play that out for a little bit. It's just cooking recipes. It's relatively benign.
Yeah.
But the law says, the rules are that the archives need this stuff for historical reasons or whatever. Do we just say, oh well, Trump gets to keep these boxes for the rest of his life? maybe burn them.
The
maybe throw them in a
argument that
dumpster.
some people in the Trump camp are saying is that, well, he did declassify these, so he has the right to
Right,
keep
but
them.
it's all
He
about,
is the
it's
ultimate
not about
authority
classified
on
information.
who is right
It's
to classify
documents
them.
that, for archival reasons, need to be in the National Archives.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't, take all of the espionage stuff out of it. At the end of the day, are we just saying that if you steal dishes from the Rose Room or whatever, I don't know where they keep dishes, if you steal furniture from the White House, they find out about it, because you were the President of the United States, you just get to keep that stuff forever, because we're just saying, as a matter of principle, no one should ever go into your house and take it back?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, that to me is the fundamental question. And so then you can talk about, well, he should have gotten 5 years to return it, 10 years, 50 years, whatever. But at some point, obviously, I think most people would agree that a line will be drawn in the sand. And if he really, really, really isn't going to comply, then there's going to have to be a human being that goes into his house to get the stuff back, whether it's FBI or some other agency or something less intense seeming. And if you admit that, then on some point, on some basis, you're going to maybe be able to get some traction with these Trump voters who don't think that this was ever going to be appropriate.
Sure, I don't disagree with that, but I guess I don't default toward trusting the FBI's judgment that now was the right time to do this and it was being done.
Sure.
And neither do you, probably.
But that's why.
And again, their naivety about how big a deal this was going to be does not suggest to me that they had necessarily thought this through. But of course, the president, by virtue of being the president, should not be entitled to more leeway from law enforcement. He should be more tightly constrained by law enforcement than your average citizen. So, yes.
Move out
agree
day is a
with you.
garage sale at the White House. Take the Lincoln bust. Take the Resolute desk. Take whatever you want. No one's ever coming for it.
Oh, my goodness. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.